Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. We are so excited to be kicking off our 24-25 pop season tonight. Wow. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Enrico Lopez-Yañez. I am the Principal Pops Conductor here of your Pacific Symphony. And for those of you that don't know what I'm doing out here right now, because you haven't attended one of these before, this is what we call Cocktails with the Conductor. So this is an opportunity before the show starts to get a little behind the scenes look at what you're going to experience on stage. We usually try and bring someone special as a special guest that's connected to the project that we're putting on stage. And tonight we have an incredible special guest. He is not only our pianist for this evening, he's a sensational pianist, arranger, composer, conductor, and is Ms. Bernadette Peters' music director. This is Tedd Firth. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hi, everybody.
So Tedd is an outstanding pianist who has traveled with Bernadette for many, many years. He's also worked with and recorded with a lot of other artists, including Michael Feinstein, with people like violinist Joshua Bell, and Brian Stokes Mitchell, and many, many others. The list goes on and on. So we're thrilled to be partnering with him and get a little inside scoop into what you'll be hearing tonight. But first, I thought we would kick things off. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your musical journey that has brought you all the way here to Costa Mesa tonight.
Sure. So I started playing piano when I was really young. I was about 5 years old, and there was just a piano in the house. My parents were high school music teachers, so there was music in the house and everything. I started just kid piano lessons, and I did that until I was in junior high, so I was 12 or 13. And when I got into high school, my dad had a bunch of big band records like Maynard Ferguson and Woody Herman and stuff, and he said, and I started putting these records on and listening to some jazz and discovering that I kind of liked it. And so I started messing around with it on the piano, but I didn't really have a lot of direction because I didn't have a teacher for that stuff. And then when I was about 15, I started working with a jazz piano teacher. I grew up in upstate New York, in a little town called Hudson Falls, about 50 miles north of Albany. And then when I was about 15, I found a great jazz piano teacher down in Albany, New York, and worked with her for about 3 or 4 years. And then I went to college. I was a jazz piano major at William Patterson University in Wayne, New Jersey. And I got my master's degree at Manhattan School of Music, and I was a jazz piano major at both those places. And when I was getting my master's degree, I found myself playing for an open mic for singers. And I realized that I liked it. And some of the singers were good. A lot of them, maybe not so much. But I just kind of liked working with everybody and playing a lot of different kinds of music. And I just discovered that I sort of had a knack for accompanying, and I enjoyed it. And so that sort of spun off a lot of opportunities, working with other singers. And of course, you don't start out working, with people like Bernadette. You start out working with, other people. But I had a blast, and I just stuck with it, and I found myself working with more established people after time as time went on, and I always tried to take any opportunity that presented itself. If the music seemed interesting and the people were cool, I was all in.
You started off with a love and passion for jazz. What was your interest or awareness of Broadway and that repertoire when you were getting started versus that transition?
Sure. Well, there was definitely an awareness of musical theater music. I remember when I was in elementary school, the high school did a production of The Sound of Music, and that was, I think, maybe the first production of any show I ever saw live, and I thought it was really cool. And so the high school I went to, the musical in the spring was always a really big deal. And they actually were one of the first high schools in the country. This is back around 1991 or so, one of the first high schools to get to license Into the Woods. And so I mean, obviously at that point I didn't know that I was going to wind up working with Bernadette a bunch of years later, but I got familiar with that music early on. So even though I was playing a lot of jazz, I always liked playing lots of different kinds of music. And so at that open mic, if somebody would bring in something by, say, Stephen Sondheim or something like that, I tried to lean into it, because even though it was maybe a little bit outside of most of what I was playing, I still enjoyed it. I found it intriguing. Yeah.
Now, the conducting world in musical theater is pretty different than the symphonic conducting world. Sort of, you work your way up oftentimes as a pianist. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the conducting and then eventually arranging and composing and all of that work that you do as well?
Sure. Well, the arranging came first, and it seems like musically everything that I do besides playing the piano is something I sort of fell into. Like when I was in college, I had to take an arranging. I had to take a couple of semesters of arranging, and I found it really interesting. But the teachers I had, they were very good arrangers, but they hadn't had a lot of classroom teaching experience, so I'm not sure how much exactly I got out of that. But I liked arranging. I thought, well, I'd be interested in doing some of this down the road. And so when opportunities presented themselves, I took them. I remember, as far as writing for an orchestra goes, the first thing that presented itself, I've worked with a singer named Tom Wopat for many, many years. In fact, the very first time I came to California, I played the Orange County Performing Arts Center with Tom Wopat. That was the first time I ever saw a palm tree, and that was back in 2002. Anyway, I had done a bunch of big band arrangements for Tom, probably around 2002. About a year later, he was doing some concerts with the Philly Pops. And he said to me, could you take those big band arrangements and blow them up for the full orchestra? And I said, sure. Meanwhile, I had never written for strings before. I had no idea, but I thought, I want to do this, so I'll do it, and let's see what happens. And so I got to know the conductor, Peter Nero, through some phone conversations, and so it was maybe 4 or 5 charts, and I sent them down there, and I got an archival recording back, and I listened to it, and it wasn't bad, it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And I thought, well, this was a good experience. I'm glad I did this. I'm glad I did that. And I thought, well, that's gonna be the end of that. About a month later, Peter calls me. He says, our Christmas concert is coming up and we have this concert band arrangement of the Christmas song. Can you expand it for the orchestra? And I said, okay, sure. I'm thinking, well, that's kind of nice. Maybe I made a good impression. Then a month later, he calls me up. He says, we're doing our annual Broadway concert, and we're doing a bunch of things from 42nd Street and Chorus Line, both of which didn't have strings in the pit. Can you expand these for, and so there was like 7 charts on that concert. This went on for 10 years. From 2003 to 2013, I did a lot of writing for the Philly Pops, and that's how I really got it together as far as arranging goes. And as far as conducting, I found myself playing sometimes for the singers that I was working with orchestras. You mentioned Brian Stokes Mitchell. Stokes was probably the first singer that I did a lot of things with an orchestra with. And so of course, people tonight will see that the way that it's set up is that you're on the podium and then I'm like right down next to you. And so I've seen a lot of conductors up close. And so once again, I sort of fell into conducting. It was one of those things where I just did it because I had to. And I remember thinking, at the time, I was a little intimidated, but I realized it's like, you've sat and watched conductors. So think about what you like to see, and think about what you don't like to see, and do the stuff that you like to see. Now, that's a bit of an oversimplification, and there's a lot more to conducting than that, but it allowed me to at least break the ice and get started. And I think the other thing about conducting is that, and maybe you can speak to this, is that you have to you're guiding the musicians through the music. You have to go in knowing that you've put in the time to learn this music. You know where the traps are set. You know where it's all, and you're just communicating to them. And so I realized it's like, I don't think of myself as a conductor so much as a guide. Sort of like, these are professional musicians. They're gonna be fine. I just need to get it started, get it stopped, that kind of thing. And so.
And along that journey, where was your first sort of connection to Bernadette Peters then? Where was your
About 15 years ago, Bernadette's musical director at the time, when they would have a concert in the New York area, Bernadette was working with 30-piece orchestras then. And so if it was in the New York area, the musical director would want to pick up players that he knew from New York. And so Michael at one point said to him, he said, hey, there's this guy, Tedd Firth, who's been playing with Stokes. You want to have him in the orchestra? And he said, sure. So that's how I met Bernadette. I did maybe 2 or 3 of these things where Marvin Laird was conducting, and I was playing the orchestra piano part. And whenever there was like a really exposed piano vocal thing, I just got up off the bench, Marvin came down, played it, and then went back to the podium, and I went back to the orchestra piano part. So that's how I met Bernadette. But I think it's really kind of fortuitous that we're doing this at the Segerstrom, because the project that where I really got to know Bernadette really well was the Into the Woods cast reunion concert that happened here about 10 years ago, and where where a local producer named Eileen Roberts got about, I think, 7 of the cast members of the original cast of Broadway cast of Into the Woods to do a concert here. And of course Bernadette was part of it, and she also had Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine on stage being interviewed. It was such a cool thing, and those are really how I got to know Bernadette. And then a few months after that, Marvin had some rotator cuff surgery, and so I stepped in and covered a few dates where I was the MD, and that was, and from then on, I think she felt comfortable working with me, and so yeah, that's how I met Bernadette.
Amazing. So with someone like Bernadette, who has such a huge career that has spanned both the stage, the screen, and all different productions and shows that she's either originated or done some of the revivals of, how did this show tonight come together in terms of the repertoire that we'll be hearing in the second half of the concert?
So most of the repertoire in the concert tonight actually predates my working with her. And these orchestrations also are by great people like Jonathan Tunick and Don Sebesky and Michael Starobin. As you're hearing like the real deal. You're hearing the real deal. And by the way, the orchestra sounds phenomenal. It's so great to hear. We do this concert in a variety of settings. We can do it as small as a piano trio, then there's sort of a 10-piece sort of chamber orchestra, and then we can do it with full orchestra. And it's always a thrill to hear this stuff played, and the orchestra's doing such an amazing job with it under your direction. But most of the repertoire does predate me. There's a couple things in here that I arranged, but I love the arc of the show as well. It's really, I don't want to give too much away, but I love that it starts in one place, and by the time you get to the middle, there's sort of a triptych of some Sondheim songs, and I just love the way it sort of builds up to that, and then kind of there's sort of like this denouement, as it were, as we approach the end of the concert. I think it's a really well put together show.
Speaking of Sondheim, Bernadette is one of the artists who probably worked with him most throughout her career and his career in terms of the number of shows and repertoire, tribute albums that she was a part of, and tribute performances. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship and sort of what makes it so special when she's on stage singing some of his music?
Yeah. I think, so Sondheim's music is pretty multifaceted. I think what I love about what she does with it is that the lyric is always sort of front and center, like the story of the song. And his music is, a lot of it is difficult. A lot of it is not easy music. But when she sings it, you're not focusing on, oh, this is a complex tune or anything. You're focusing on the story that she's telling. And I think that's one of the reasons why he liked her so much, is because I think a lot of singers, realizing that his music is not easy, would put a little distance there. In other words, just make sure that they're getting the notes correct and all that kind of thing. And I'm sure he appreciated that. But with her, there's another level of understanding of the lyric, and I think I think he's on record saying that he thought that she was the best interpreter of his music, and I agree.
No. I know that you don't want to give away too much about the program tonight, but is there maybe a piece or two that are sort of some of your favorites when they come up in the set list that you love to play and be a part of?
Oh yeah. I mean, of course, there's a lot of highlights. And I don't want to spoil any surprises. I'll say this: there are a few things where one of the things that I kind of like, especially as the concert goes on, is that there are a few numbers where I start out playing, and it's just myself and Bernadette, and then we get the full orchestra in, and that goes on for a little while, and then it pairs down to just me again. There's something kind of fun about that moment of having sort of the intimacy of the duo moving into sort of the larger feel of what you can only get with an orchestra, and then going back to the intimacy of the duo. There's something very cool about that. It's for me, it's a really nice moment.
Some of the songs, actually most of the songs that we'll hear tonight, especially the ones that are from stage shows, we're hearing, like you said, expanded versions, because in a pit orchestra on Broadway, you're not fitting more than, maybe a dozen or so musicians. So these have been sort of aggrandized for the 70 to 80 musicians that we have on stage tonight.
Right.
How does that change or affect both Bernadette's interaction with the orchestra and the music, and just the audience experience in your perspective, hearing it that way as opposed to the pit version?
Sure. I think most orchestrators, and I don't want to speak for somebody like Jonathan Tunick, but speaking for myself, you always, when you're arranging these things, you're always hearing that, even though obviously somebody like Jonathan knows that in a pit you're going to have a small string section. In your mind, you're always hearing, 8, 6 and 4 or whatever. You're always hearing a larger section because let's face it, big string sections sound great, and the sweep of it is really extraordinary. So I think part of it is that, especially with the strings, to hear it with a large complement of good string players, there's nothing like that. And I just think that most orchestrators, they will concede that when it's done in a pit, you're gonna have a small section, but I do think you're always hearing a large section. So that's great. And similarly with the brass, to hear 4 French horns as opposed to 1, that's a big difference right there. It makes you're gonna get a lot more. That's a big difference in sound right there. So
I think that's true also when you even talk about, on, say, a film, or, Bernadette has been on shows like Smash and Mozart in the Jungle, and so where you do have these bigger orchestras that are involved in the soundtrack, what you can't ever capture is what it's like live experiencing that number of musicians working together. And there's something very special and unique about that. When we do a John Williams score here, it's one thing to watch the movie at home, even if you have the nicest, most high-tech sound system, but you can't quite capture what I think, like you said, the arranger and composer envisions in their mind when they're actually putting pen to paper, having that live, not only live group, but also in a live setting that is designed to amplify naturally the acoustic of these instruments.
It's like when they make the guacamole at your table, It's like it's being prepared fresh for you, that you're watching the guy with the mortar and the avocados, and you're seeing it all come together, and there's something very cool. It's so much cooler than just having like a bowl of guacamole brought out to you, you know?
Absolutely. The last question I have is just about, we present all these great artists often, but it's so special when we get someone who's truly like a legend of the industry. And especially someone who is still actively performing at such a high level, which is very rare. Can you tell us a little bit about just how it is for you personally to get to work with Bernadette and travel with her and have someone who has literally done it all and brings that to the stage?
Well, I guess she is the sweetest person, and she's a lovely person and incredibly easy to work with. It's a total package. It's great, and that's, you don't find that often. We've been around. I mean, I think I've been around more than I think I got a few more. I got a whole bunch of gray hairs now. So the thing is that, and hey, the reality is that sometimes there's like hiccups here and there. That's just part of it. But it seems with Bernadette, it's always very easy. It's always just she's everything is in service of the music, and nothing is, there's no put-ons, no artifice. It's all very genuine, and she's just a lovely person. So I'm lucky.
That's something I noticed in rehearsal. A lot of artists, when they're rehearsing with the orchestra, they'll maybe not sing full out, or they'll they'll sing a little bit and then stop. And when it comes to their solo numbers, they don't want to rehearse them. Bernadette wanted to sing every note in the show this afternoon when we met with her. So this evening, you'll be hearing her singing this entire thing for the second time today, which is on its own impressive, but also the fact that, she doesn't have anything to prove when she's in front of the orchestra or to the audience. So the fact that she wants to shows that love for what she does, I think. And
absolutely.
It's so special that every chance she gets, she wants to sing it. She wants to sing fully. She wants to, pour her heart and soul into the music that she puts on stage, which is very unique also for us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great. So days like today, this is some of the best. This is some of the most fun times in the business I can have. So
I agree. Well, you are all in for quite the treat tonight. We will be joined, as you heard, by one of the legends of the stage and screen, Ms. Bernadette Peters. The first half of the concert will feature some of Broadway's sort of biggest, I'll say, overtures and sort of highlights from classic Broadway, many of which, actually all of which, because I chose them, connect somehow to Bernadette Peters. So we'll walk through that together as the show starts on the first half, and then we'll be joined by Ms. Peters on the second half. But until then, enjoy your drinks, enjoy the company of all our fellow members here, and thank you so much for being here with us for Cocktails with the Conductor, and we'll see you all in just a little bit inside the hall.
Thanks, Enrico. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.